Good afternoon. Copenhagen is no longer just a capital, it's a frontline. As Rome reached European skies from Poland to Denmark, leaders from over 15 nations gather under heavy guard, racing to build a drone wall and transform Ukraine's battlefield experience into continental defense. Yet, deep rifts surface. Orban denounces EU war plans, while von der Leyen pushes to fund Kiev with frozen Russian assets. With America's support wavering and China watching closely, this summit may mark Europe's boldest step towards strategic autonomy or its most dangerous illusion. Welcome to Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
The Guardian has reported at the European Political Community Summit in Copenhagen, the Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen issued a stark direct warning: Russia will not stop until they are forced to do so. This statement shatters any remaining illusion of a quick peace settlement. Other European leaders echoed this alarm. Poland's PM declared that the continent now faces a new complex type of war. France Macron, meanwhile, urged a shift towards a policy of strategic ambiguity for stronger collective deterrence. The critical takeaway from Europe's point of view: EU defence must now be urgently prioritized. The continent must immediately bolster Ukraine's air defense and ensure that its common strength makes any further Russian attacks unthinkable. According to the European Conservative, the European Summit in Copenhagen starkly exposed deep internal rifts, undermining the image of EU unity. Consensus failed on key matters, highlighting a fundamental conflict over power. Brussels pushing integration versus sovereign nations prioritizing national control. Hungarian Prime Minister Orban was the main voice of opposition, framing the bloc's focus on Ukraine funding and quick accession as a dangerous war plan. He serves as a scapegoat, yet his resistance to abandoning the national veto reflects a silent majority fears. Crucially, the issue delivered no progress on financing Ukraine or securing maritime borders. This paralysis confirms that the EU is currently a fragile patchwork of clashing interests where the principle of national sovereignty remains non-negotiable. Copenhagen's Skies 10th Summit converge. Drones loom as Europe's leaders forge a shield against shadow war.
Copenhagen, a city of fairy tales, now bracing for war without front lines, as nearly 50 European leaders gather for the 7th European Political Community Summit. The Danish capital is under unprecedented security lockdown, not from tanks, but from drones. Hybrid warfare is no longer theory. From drone incursions into NATO airspace to cyber attacks on energy grids, Russia's shadow campaign is testing Europe's red lines, and Copenhagen is the crucible. At the heart of the summit, a bold proposal: a continental drone wall powered by AI and shared radar, stretching from the Baltics to the Black Sea. Ukraine, still at war, is not just a recipient, it is a partner. Its battlefield drone tech could be Europe's early warning shield. The European political community, born from Macron's 2022 vision, now includes nations beyond Brussels' orbit. Why? Because security today ignores EU borders. Georgia faces Russian occupation. Moldova battles disinformation. This is not just an EU project. It is a pan-European survival path. On the ground, 6 nations have deployed joint counter-drone units, a de facto rapid reaction force. Is this the embryo of a European army? Not yet, but the muscle memory of collective defense is forming. Yet unity is fragile. With US leadership uncertain, Europe races towards strategic autonomy, but frozen Russian assets, defense budgets, and Hungary's descent threaten momentum. Copenhagen will not end the war, but if Europe emerges with a shared shield, not just shared statements, this summit may mark the dawn of a new security era where drones don't dictate destiny. Will hybrid war ignite a broader conflict or forge a stronger Europe?
And to provide more analysis, we're joined from Brussels by Ms. Kamila Zaryta-Romanovska, Professor of EU Law and Security Studies. Thank you for being with us. And from Paris, Mr. Meher Nicholas Fazeli, Director of EU Asian Center. Good evening to you both, and welcome to Think Tank. Let me start here with Ms. Romanovska. And Ms. Romanovska, with Poland's Tusk warning that Russia is already at war with Europe, how can the EU reconcile Eastern urgency with Western fiscal caution, especially when Belgium still blocks the frozen assets loan for Ukraine?
Well, first of all, we have to remember about a very important issue, that we are now under attack as Europe, and not in the trenches, but in the shadows. Hybrid warfare powered by AI is probing our borders, our cables, our hospitals, and our public trust. The only effective way and effective answer is to deep unity and anticipatory deterrence. That's the reason why, indeed, we can see here, when it comes to the fiscal issue and the summit within the Copenhagen, the Prime Minister Tusk is quite right to stress that Russia is already at war with Europe. Because the hybrid warfare, the drones over Polish refineries, the cyber attacks against hospitals, sabotage, seabed infrastructure, it's a continuous conflict between the stakeholders within the region. For words of regal witness, it's not theory, it's a daily reality. The Western European countries, especially those with fiscal cautious states like Belgium or Netherlands, argue that financing must remain prudent. The frozen assets debate shows that this tension, the Belgian hesitation, is less about reluctance to support Ukraine and more about protecting Eurozone legal credibility as a fiscal hub. How we can do it is the question we can ask ourselves. Because through the common deterrence financing, in my opinion, is the best way, because that means that EU-level guarantees, not national risk exposure. If the EU as a whole issues a facility backed by the frozen Russian assets, the risk will be pulled. The legality is encoded in European Union law, and markets see unity rather than fragmentation, and it's a very powerful statement. At the same time, reconciliation is not only fiscal, it requires investment in the deterrence enabling technologies, which are quite expensive. The EDA is already coordinating joint counter EUAS procurement, so smaller states don't bear the cost alone. Frontex, which is doing incredible progress, is now piloting hybrid threat monitoring, integrating border surveillance, cyber and UAV detection. And we have IRIS-2, secure satellite constellation that will provide resilient connectivity. So not single member state faces strategic isolation. The deterrence message to Moscow is simple. Eastern countries and their urgency sets the tempo. Western prudence sets the structure, but together Europe pays the bill and hardens its shield, except against most of the known and unknown threats, including the hybrid one and AI one.
Mr. Fazeli, Macron speaks of strategic ambiguity and violating drones. But can Europe backwards with unified action when southern members demand focus on migration, not missiles?
Yeah, it's a great question, and here I will beg to disagree firmly with most of what my esteemed colleague Dr. Romanowska just said, and for a simple reason: Europe is not a unified entity when it comes to diplomacy and military affairs. Far from it. In reality, the real name, the real full name of what we call the European Union is first and foremost the European Commercial and Economic Cooperation Community. So the key word here is community. It's a community of nations, of sovereign nations, focusing specifically on joint economic and commercial law matters. Later on, quite recently, with what we call, the Lisbon Treaty, we Europeans, a small appendage saying that, after focusing first and foremost on commercial and military and commercial law issues, we will develop slowly a modicum of convergence in the fields of diplomacy, and that's it, right? So
but
really,
no mention to security and
in the Lisbon Treaty,
right.
Common foreign policy is a minor paragraph, and a common defense is even lower, below common foreign policy. So what I'm coming at, of course, if you are Estonian, if you are Lithuanian, if you are Polish, you have a border with Russia. So as a Polish politician or as an Estonian, whatever general, your interest is to stretch the letter of the European constitutional law and say, oh yeah, it means that we are united all together. So, and Macron, by the way, Macron is on the same wavelength, which is really stupid in my opinion, because France and Italy and Spain, they have bigger fish to fry. So of course, Hungary, Italy, Spain, France, Portugal, Belgium have much bigger, more important issues to deal with, than the defense of Poland or Lithuania or Estonia, let alone Ukraine, which is outside of Europe. But for purely ideological reasons, zealots, because Macron is a zealot, he agrees with the policy consensus in Estonia and Poland, and he's happy to stretch the letter of the EU constitution beyond a normal, moderate interpretation. And of course, here, Putin helped them. So what I'm coming at is the stupid, brutal, erratic behavior of Vladimir Putin helped the extremists in the Baltic states, Poland, and people like Macron, because it gave them a pretext to double down on that silly, imaginary military European policy, because there is no unified European military policy. It's a lie. It's a small paragraph, and the EU constitution says that we have to focus on commercial and economic issue. And by the way, 2 days ago, the European Union published its latest macroeconomic figures. What do they say? That economic growth in most European countries, especially Western European countries like France and Germany, is close to 0%. So now we have 0% GDP growth in France and Germany, and inflation is above the 2% objective of the European Central Bank. So the macroeconomic situation is really bad, and the immigration situation is out of control. The terrorism situation is out of control. So this is really the policies we should focus on in Europe at the moment.
Well, if I may just ask, we are forgetting. I absolutely agree from the constitutional point of view, but we have
no,
Ms.
Romanowska, I didn't even ask you. I didn't even make the question yet, and I will give you all the chance to answer back to Mr. Fazeli here. But let me here ask you, Ms. Romanowska. Sweden deploys an advanced anti-drones unit to protect Copenhagen. Does this ad hoc military cooperation signal a shift away from EU bureaucratic delays towards real-time defense solidarity? And we're speaking here about real-time defense solidarity, as Mr. Fazeli respectively have said that it's just a paragraph in the whole charter. Please go ahead.
Well, absolutely. I agree that the question of defense and security cooperation is not very much highlighted in the Lisbon Treaty, but we are forgetting here about very important issue, which is PESCO cooperation, permanent structured cooperation. And what we have here, the Sweden deployment sits on the top of it, because in the counter-EUAS, military mobility and Euro for crisis response, this is actually what PESCO is doing. And PESCO has already procured common standards, training pathways, and procurement clubs that make it possible for the Swedish and French units to plug into Danish defense almost seamlessly. In other words, Copenhagen shows that PESCO is actually working quite well in the real time. And in this real-time solidarity, it's actually something that new European model is operating now.
But let me
Yes.
hear Ms. Romanowska ask you about this solidarity, because as you're speaking here, you're speaking about each European country working on its own, but they are not working collectively. And this is what Mr. Fazeli was speaking about. It's each country working on its own with no collective measure that is being taken. Please.
Well, I agree from the legal point of view that indeed in the Constitution of the Europe and then afterwards in the Lisbon Treaty, this is not highlighted, and this was not the key issue which has been discussed and adopted. But that's actually what's happening now. Due to the really constant threat and due to the problems regarding the lack of technological sovereignty as well, we have to unify. This is something which European Union has to do, including the question regarding the hybrid threats and asymmetrical attacks. It can unify. If we will build a service, it's not defense. It's a really credible wall. It's federated, it needs a layered network, and this is what is going to happen. Air and land, it's 3D GMAT radars, passive RF focused on common operational picture, paired with an GNS, data link, denial, takeover, and V-Shroud and CRAN. Maritime and subsea shipboard, the CUS, as a port and offshore wind, acoustic arrays, and autonomous underwater interceptors to protect cables and pipelines, which is quite well commercial to the protection of critical infrastructure, as well as the commercial of commerce and actually the services and the movement of the goods within Europe. That's the reason why this is prime hybrid targets our key infrastructure, including our unities and our fabrics, which has to be protected. Vertical integration is really important as well, because we need to fit low altitude CUAS into the European sky shield, which is already working. But indeed, the several programs are fragmented. What we need to do is actually ensure that there is interoperability between various systems, various stakeholders, and cooperation between countries, which are indeed having a lot of things, let's say, not in common and being conducted separately. But when they are included within the NATO framework, and if NATO and EU are working more closely, the real chance of having cooperation and strengthening external borders, not only in the context of protection of integrated border management, but into the defense sector, will actually be able to see a real outcome and a real effects. Because after the recent airspace violation, EU leaders already explicitly discussed and backed the drone war direction. The debate now is not how, it's how, but not if. So how are we going to do it? Former SLE, for instance, in the real response time false positive rate, is to open interfaces, joint procurement within the EDA, for instance, and public-private consortia of very strong EU aspect that will be capable to
I can understand, but these are aspirations. This is the hope, Mr. Bonowska, but that does not reflect what is going on the realities of the matters or on the ground. Let me go to Mr. Fazeli. Mr. Fazeli, Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis insists Europe must use its own resources, but can strategic autonomy succeed when France champions long-range strike capabilities while Italy and Spain demand equal focus on southern migration threats?
Very good question. Very good question. And to answer your question, I will start by saying that here, Dr. Romanowska is partly correct. Why am I saying she's partly correct? Because you're right. It's PESCO and the whole, warmongering, the warmongering discourse. We hear from the neoconservatives, who are Ursula von der Leyen and Emmanuel Macron. They are neoconservatives. What is the meaning of neoconservative? These people are admirers of George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and Tony Blair. That says a lot because, in America, these ideas have been discredited. So American voters and UK voters completely rejected the policies of George Bush, Dick Cheney, and Tony Blair. But here we are in many European capitals, including, of course, Paris and Warsaw, and at the helm of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, we are promoting a neoconservative worldview, which is very aggressive, very militaristic. So once again, not focusing on the economy, not focusing on commerce, not focusing, as the Italians and the Greeks rightly say, on migration, but focusing on military issue. And how are they doing that? They're, because their aspirations are winning. So that aspirational, imaginary, right? And some may say illegal rush to turn the EU into a big military machine, completely in sync with NATO.
But here, Mr. Fazeli, aren't those aspirations are very necessary, particularly at that very particular moment when we're speaking about challenges that are emerging, and we're speaking here about some of the threats on Europe's security and stability?
Yes and no, because we are a democracy. So the people of Europe need to vote, right? So when we had, the Maastricht and Lisbon Treaty, each and every nation individually had a referendum, or at least Parliament voted, and a majority of MPs or citizens voted for that, And there is a hierarchy in international law. There's a hierarchy of norms. So the Maastricht and Lisbon treaties are really big. They're really at the top of the legal food chain. The PESCO, the PESCO agreement, or the PESCO, permanent structure association, which dates back to 2017, legally it's a minor protocol. So a protocol is much below a big supranational treaty like Lisbon or Maastricht. So what I'm coming at, if Ursula von der Leyen and Macron and the Polish government, they really want to turn the EU into a big military machine, why not? Let's have a referendum in Italy, Greece, Spain, right? And we have the latest opinion polls. Less than 12% of French voters support President Macron. In Germany, which is the country where Ursula von der Leyen was born, she's a German citizen. In Germany, less than 18% of German voters, they support Ursula von der Leyen's party, the CDU. So here we have it, Are we a democracy? Okay, if we are a democracy, let's have a referendum in Spain, in France, in Germany, and ask the people, the voters, do you agree with Macron and von der Leyen? Do you agree in transforming the EU in a big supranational military machine? I will bet that 60 or 70% of EU voters will say no. No, Mr. Macron. No, Madame von der Leyen.
Right. Mr. Romanowska, can a drone wall truly unify Europe's fragmented air defense, or will it deepen the gap between Eastern urgency and Western hesitation? And I'm giving you also the chance to respond to what Mr. Fazeli was speaking about, how democratic Europe is.
Well, thank you very much. I partly agree with my esteemed colleague as well. But the problem is that we are speaking about something different as a recognition of hybrid threats. Because in the European Union, as a hybrid threat, we are not only recognize the threats coming from the eastern flank, but as well in our, let's say, vocabulary, the hybrid threats are as well irregular migration, drug trafficking, and all those double use of crime, including double use of crime when it comes to the threats to the European security and European internal and external security and aspect of it, and position the world. So while partly on this, I agree with my colleague, I have to say that the danger is that the drone wall indeed can become a metaphorical Maginot Line that will be fragmented, that might be national, and that might be penetrable. But this actually will require to us to act, and that will require some, let's say, something which my friend will not like it, a federated European capability, because that will actually speed up the work. The problem here we can see is air and land layer require more action. Already the things are going on due to the regulation of the European Parliament, European Council of the Frontex, which is European external European border and coast guard. They already investing a lot. They already using a satellite in order to have a real life surveillance and really a proactive look at intelligence when it comes to the data gathering and data processing, when it comes to the external borders of the European Union, as well as cooperation in the context of migration, in the context of defense. But what we really need is to actually keep these things together, because when it comes to the migration, Italy will be absolutely yes, and Spain will be happy as well to just, but we actually have to see the double use of those investments which will going to happen. When it comes to the maritime and sea level, we need the same things, because northern countries have already seen the context of the sabotage and unmanned underwater vehicles, and the Frontex is working with navies, it's testing acoustic arrays, etc. So we need to finance a common EU system which will be tied to European Sky Shield.
Yeah, indeed, Mr. Munafska, you are representing a wide range segment in the European society, but also Mr. Fazeli is representing another wide range segment. Let me here go to Mr. Fazeli, and with UK Prime Minister Starmer reaffirming ties to NATO's rota just days after meeting EU leaders. Is London positioning itself as a bridge between transatlantic security and Europe's emerging drone shield, or stepping back from continental defense altogether? What do you think?
So here I think that sadly, ideology is more important than the real world. And from a policy thinking perspective, Keir Starmer is aligned with Ursula von der Leyen and Emmanuel Macron. He's a little more moderate. So you could say that, von der Leyen and Macron are the extremists, and Keir Starmer supports them, but he's more polite and more moderate. Why does it matter? Because at the end of the day, the big military powers of Europe are Britain, the UK, France, and Germany, right? What Poland or Italy, what they do or don't do is nice, but it will not tilt the balance. So really things for a European defense, things happen at London, Berlin, Paris level. And here, geography is important. And so even though the UK left the European Union 5 years ago with Brexit, the UK very much remains aligned and allied with Western Europe when it comes to military issues. But these alliances are older than the EU itself, right? So basically, the fact that there is military cooperation between France and England or Britain, it dates back to the year 1890, right? 1890 is long before the EU or NATO were founded. So what I'm coming at, yes, it is important to have a modicum, a minimum of united defense cooperation in Western Europe. Yes, the foundation of that is clearly British, German, French, but that is something that is happening on its own. And it's not necessarily, in my opinion, not necessarily something that should be directed only against Russia.
Right.
By directing everything only against Russia, we are creating distortion, big distortion. And we are giving the impression that once again, the EU is becoming a big military machine. I think it's a mistake. And America, the elephant in the room, no wordplay, the elephant in the room is the Republican Party, the new Republican Party under the helm of President Trump. They are now anti-neocon. So really the second Trump presidency, and that started 9 months ago when President Trump entered the White House, is anti-neocon. What does it mean? They're against military entanglements. They don't want to put, the full backing of American military forces behind NATO because they want to focus on Asia.
Yes, Mr. Fazeli, we're out of time. We're out of time, and yes, your point is so clear here. That was Ms. Kamila Zarichte-Romanovska, Professor of EU Law and Security Studies, and Mr. Meher Nicholas Fazeli, Director of the EU Asian Center. We thank you both for this very insightful and very valuable discussion here. But Copenhagen Summit laid bare Europe's ambitions and its fractures, as shown in this conversation. Unity is urgent, but trust, technology and sovereignty remain the true test of a continent on the edge. That brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank, which always unveils the complexities of our changing world. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.